Beneath the shadow of Rome's majestic marble columns, one of history's most shocking and shameful stories was unfolding. On the surface, the empire radiated power and glory, lands trembling under the march of legions, triumphal processions echoing with victories, temples adorned with gold and marble. Yet behind this brilliance lurked intrigues, betrayals, and immoralities that tainted the grandeur. Rome was not only the heart of the world, but also a stage where ambition and lust revealed their darkest faces. At the center of this stage stood a mother and her son. Their tale was too twisted to be explained merely by blood, too deep to be confined to political ambition, and too horrific to be dismissed as idle gossip. This was the story of Nero and Agrippina. Agrippina was one of the most ambitious women Rome had ever seen. To her, motherhood meant neither love nor sacrifice. She did not see her son as a child, but as a key to the throne. From the very moment of his birth, he was not a son, but a tool, a stepping stone to power. In her cold gaze burned not maternal warmth, but a relentless hunger for domination. Nero grew up under the weight of his mother's shadow. Her ambition poisoned his childhood. His toys were games of power, his bedtime tales, stories of betrayal. Even as a boy, he dined with Rome's most powerful figures, yet those banquets served not bread, but schemes. His teachers were not mentors, but instruments of his mother's design. Before he could choose his own path, he had already become a prisoner of her ambition. In time, however, the bond between them took on a sinister shape. Rumors spread among the people. There was nothing normal about the Emperor's relationship with his mother. In the streets, in the baths, in the forums, in the taverns, whispers carried the same shocking claim: Nero is with his mother. Perhaps these words were exaggerations, perhaps the inventions of enemies. But in Rome, a rumor could be more powerful than the truth itself. Nero's attachment to Agrippina only fueled the fire. She appeared in every decision he made. Soon the people believed that the throne did not belong to Nero at all, but to Agrippina. Her shadow stalked the corridors of the imperial palace, whispered into the ears of senators, and weakened the resolve of soldiers. And it was at this point that the story turned darker. For when a mother sought to share her son's throne, and a son crumbled under his mother's shadow, blood ties gradually rotted into betrayal. Rome's glorious throne was about to become the stage for a bloody and shameful war. Nero's rise to the throne was as shocking as it was terrifying for the people of Rome. At just 17, a boy had become the ruler of an immense empire. Normally, someone so young and inexperienced could have brought disaster to the management of such a colossal machine. Yet behind Nero stood another figure, his mother. Agrippina turned her son's youth, inexperience, and emotional vulnerabilities to her advantage. For her, this was the pinnacle of plans she had been crafting for years. Her son sat upon Rome's throne, but the strings were firmly in her hands. During the early years of his reign, Nero moved almost like his mother's shadow. Every decree approved by the Senate, every order issued to the army, even the smallest appointments in the palace bore her mark. Everyone in the court knew whom to obey, seemingly the emperor, but in reality, Agrippina. The woman had seized a power no Roman empress before her had dared to claim. Rumors in Rome multiplied during this period. People whispered that Agrippina controlled not only her son politically, but also personally. She dined beside him, shared his bedchamber, and appeared to be the sole figure shaping Nero's view of the world. Whether these rumors were true mattered little. In Rome, even a whisper often carried more weight than the truth. People began calling him the emperor, a puppet of his mother. Some went further, suggesting a scandalous bond between them. For young Nero, this situation was both a blessing and a nightmare. His path to the throne had been paved by his mother, yet Rome seemed to belong more to her than to him. At first he accepted it, guided by Agrippina's intelligence and experience. But as youth gave way to ambition and desire and power grew stronger, his mother's presence became a suffocating chain. New figures began to appear around Nero, most notably the ambitious Poppaea Sabina, who sought to captivate the young emperor's mind. Poppaea was different from Agrippina. She offered him tenderness and freedom, whispering promises of escape from his mother's shadow. When Agrippina noticed this closeness, she warned her son with a gaze full of threat. "You are my creation. Your destiny lies in my hands," she seemed to say. But Nero was ready to break free from her chains. At this point, the relationship between mother and son was turning into a terrifying war. As Agrippina interfered in Nero's life, decisions, and personal relationships, his anger grew. Within the marble walls of Rome's palaces, a silent battle raged. On one side, a mother imposing her ambition on her son and on the empire. On the other, a young emperor determined to escape his shadow at any cost. The public could not see this war, but they could feel it. Every decision carried contradictions. An order issued one day might be overturned the next. One day, the weight of his mother's power was felt. The next, Nero's fury erupted. Governing Rome had become far more than a struggle for a throne. It was a complex, shameful bond swinging between love and hate, between a mother and her son. As tension mounted, a question began to echo openly through the streets of Rome. Is Nero the emperor or Agrippina? What fueled Nero's anger and desire for freedom was not just the throne. It was the need to escape his mother's shadow. Agrippina had spent years shaping her son, using him almost as an extension of herself. Every word, every decision, every gesture was part of her plan. Nero's mind had been filled with his mother's strategies, his small weaknesses, his strengths, all meticulously observed over the years. The young emperor now had to break these chains. The first plans were carried out secretly and cunningly. Nero began by testing his mother's trust, gradually drawing the palace advisors to his side. Courtiers, generals, and senators treaded cautiously, uncertain whose favor they should seek. Everyone knew a silent war was unfolding within the palace, but no one could have predicted it would end in blood. Agrippina did not ignore her son's growing independence. At every opportunity, she tried to control him, steer his decisions, and keep him away from figures like Poppaea. But Nero was now fully aware of the scope of his mother's ambition and control. Every plot in the palace, every conversation, every advisory session served as a warning. This woman seeks to dominate you, and you must stop her. Finally, Nero launched his first serious attempt. Plans were made to kill Agrippina. Initially, simple poison was considered, administered through food, drink, or even ritual objects, intended to remove her quietly. Yet Agrippina's years of experience and sharp intelligence allowed her to detect these traps. Every attempt failed due to her vigilance. Undeterred, Nero devised a bolder, more elaborate plan. He invited his mother on a private sea voyage. The ship was prepared with secret mechanisms, rotted planks, and schemes designed to sink it. But Agrippina, wary and perceptive, sensed danger before setting sail. Thanks to her instincts and intelligence, she survived the attempt. This failure only fueled Nero's rage further. By now, killing his mother was no longer a choice. It had become an inevitable necessity. Whispers spread through the palace and across Rome. The public, the Senate, and even the legions began to sense the tension between Nero and Agrippina. Yet no one could anticipate how shameful and bloody the unfolding events would be. Their conflict had grown beyond a mere struggle for the throne. It had become a family tragedy entwined with blood and betrayal. At last, Nero steeled his resolve. He was ready to use the darkest measures to rid himself entirely of his mother and claim sole rule over Rome. The palace walls seemed to listen, shadows carried secrets, and every corner had become part of the plan. The people of Rome, unaware of the horrors unfolding at the empire's heart, felt a growing tension as whispers spread through the streets. What no one realized was that history was about to witness a mother slain by her own son. Nero's dark fury, sharp mind, and ruthless cunning had brought the plan to its final stage. Only one step remained: to walk toward a tragic climax where power, freedom, and blood converged. Agrippina would resist with all her ambition and intelligence, while Nero would cross every limit on his path to the throne, etching his name into history as a merciless tyrant. Nero's patience had run out. Though the throne was his mother's shadow still followed his every step. As he walked through the marble corridors of the palace, he felt her presence in every room, her schemes, her influence, her control. Every decision, every movement seemed like a piece on a chessboard where she was always one step ahead. But Nero was no longer a child. Young yet ambitious, clever yet ruthless, he was determined to sever his mother's strings and claim his independence. Agrippina, meanwhile, watched her son without a blink. To her, Nero was not merely a child, but the pinnacle of a strategy she had been plotting for years. If she could fully control him, she would effectively rule Rome herself. She wove intrigues in every corner of the palace, guided her advisors, and maneuvered generals and senators according to her designs. Her intelligence and determination, sharpened by years of experience, had become for Nero not just a threat, but a labyrinth. Finally, the plans to eliminate his mother were set in motion. The first attempts involved poisoning. Nero tried to remove her quietly through food, drink, and palace rituals. Yet Agrippina's vigilance foiled every attempt. Each failure only fueled Nero's rage and strengthened his resolve. He now had a single objective: to utterly destroy his mother. To this end, Nero invited Agrippina on a private sea voyage. Everything on the ship was prepared: secret mechanisms, rotten planks, and contraptions designed to sink it. But Agrippina's instincts had not failed her. She discovered the plot and managed to survive the attempt. This only intensified Nero's fury. Subtle intrigue and patience were no longer enough. Blood had to be shed. Tensions in the palace reached their peak. Courtiers and generals waited silently, uncertain whose side they were on. The public saw nothing from the outside, yet rumors echoed through every street. Is the emperor merely a puppet of his mother? Will Nero escape his mother's shadow? Such questions circulated in the forums, baths, and marketplaces, revealing the silent war raging within the palace. At last, Nero made a bold and merciless decision. He would kill his mother using the darkest and most direct method. This plan was no simple trap. It was a combination of intelligence, opportunism, and ruthless cunning. Palace officials oversaw the mechanisms on the ship, executing Nero's orders with precision. Agrippina, relying on her wit and experience, struggled to survive. But this time her opponent was not only her son, she was paying the price of the power she had amassed over the years. That sea voyage became the scene of one of the most dramatic and shameful events in Roman history. The events on the ship led not only to the death of a mother, but also to the staining of a family, an empire, and human dignity with blood. By eliminating Agrippina, Nero declared his absolute dominion over the throne. Yet this victory was not just the triumph of power and authority, it was the triumph of humanity's darkest impulses and shameful desires. From that moment, the balance within the Roman palace shifted completely. The young emperor was free, but his freedom had been bought with blood. The people, the Senate, and the generals were either unaware of the bloody events or silently complicit. The grand stone walls of Rome echoed with a shame never before heard. Nero's power was now unquestionable, but it rested on a mother's betrayal and a son's ruthlessness. And thus, history's witnesses began to take careful note. A mother, a son, and an empire, a story woven with intrigue, betrayal, lust, and blood. Behind Rome's magnificent facade, it revealed the darkest aspects of human nature and one of history's most shameful events. Agrippina's death seemed like a victory for Nero. The throne was now entirely under his control, and he had freed himself from his mother's shadow. Yet the triumph was far from satisfying. A void, a sense of unease, and fear began to grow within him. He had eliminated the woman who had shaped his life for years, but in doing so, he also began to confront his own conscience. For the first time, he faced the full extent of how ruthless his power could be. The people of Rome were initially unaware of the events. The palace and senate were shrouded in silence, while whispers carried the true story through the corridors and streets. Some senators and generals feared the young emperor's cruelty, while others submitted to him unconditionally. Palace officials, as always, moved cautiously, unsure whose side to take, and a quiet tension spread along the marble halls. Beneath Rome's outward splendor, a silent terror was taking hold. Nero began to feel utterly alone, both within and outside the palace. He had to act without his mother's guidance, intelligence, and experience, yet he also had to control his own cruelty and ambition. Every decision, every command, every action reflected a shadow of his dark nature. This psychological strain shook him deeply. He had risen to the throne as emperor, yet a storm raged within his soul. Meanwhile, the public and those around him were gripped by fear, influenced by the circulating rumors. Everyone wondered what steps the young emperor would take next. Some worshipped him, others plotted in secret. The palace was filled with hidden threats and betrayals. Every corner, every room held a watchful eye or a listening ear. Nero knew this and understood that betrayal could strike at any moment. This awareness made him both cautious and merciless. Nero's psychological collapse also reshaped his relationships within the palace. He trusted no one and judged everyone solely by their usefulness to him. Figures like Poppaea Sabina represented both power and desire at his side, fueling his obsession with escaping his mother's shadow. There was no balance in the palace anymore. Power rested entirely in Nero's hands, yet it brought him tension and paranoia instead of peace. During this period, the first signs of Nero's cruelty emerged. To maintain absolute control over his sonship and the empire, he began to instill fear, not only over his mother, but over everyone around him. Palace officials, generals, and senators were forced to obey, lest they incur his wrath. For the first time in Roman history, a young emperor established both a physical and psychological reign of absolute fear. Most importantly, this episode completely corrupted Nero's relationships with others. No love, friendship, or loyalty was now trustworthy. Killing his mother had taught him the power of authority and the weight of death. Though he had risen as a young emperor within the Roman palace, his heart carried a bloody void. This emptiness foreshadowed the ruthless acts and shameful decisions he would make in the years to come. At this point, the silent whispers echoing through Rome's grand stone walls became a harbinger of future tragedies. Nero's elimination of his mother was more than a family tragedy. It marked the beginning of a period that would shake the morals of Roman society, the confidence of the Senate, and the faith of the people. This event would forever be recounted in history as one of the most shameful and blood-stained examples of a mother-son relationship. With Agrippina's death, Nero appeared to be the sole ruler of Rome. Yet the throne was more than a symbol of power. It was a burden, a trap, and a cage of isolation. Though only 17, the young emperor had to navigate the intricate balances of the palace and the city. At first, this power gave him a sense of freedom and authority, but soon it revealed the loneliness and the terrifying weight of ruling. His first task was to consolidate his influence over the Senate and the palace. He replaced advisors, strategically placed loyal generals and officials, and established control over key positions. But these moves were not merely administrative. They were a policy of fear. Everyone knew that incurring Nero's wrath could mean death or exile. Peace was absent from the palace. The marble walls echoed with silent tension and unease. One of Nero's first great acts of cruelty was the political purge that began with his mother's elimination. Removing Agrippina had strengthened his position, but also sent a clear message. No one could oppose the emperor's will. Close relatives, senators, and generals now tread carefully, aware of the danger of missteps. The Roman palace had become a labyrinth of fear. Every corner and room was filled with hidden threats. Nero was not only politically ruthless, he developed his own unique sense of cruelty. The people and palace officials quickly recognized that despite his youth, he could be merciless. In his early years, he intervened in the city's cultural and social life, turning public spectacles, games, and festivals into instruments of fear and violence. This both reinforced his authority and stirred curiosity and dread among the populace. At the other end of the empire, he secured control over the military. The legions were reorganized to fight not merely for Rome, but for Nero's authority. This allowed him to neutralize any potential rebellion before it could take root. Yet with power came a void within Nero's soul. The fear and guilt from killing his mother cast a dark shadow over his young mind. Drama continued within the palace. Figures like Poppaea Sabina and others tried to influence Nero's decisions, guiding him through both love and lust. This created a complex inner conflict. The desire for power and freedom clashed with the craving for pleasure and victory. Every action became both a strategic and personal battle. The people of Rome sensed the young emperor's ruthless and dark style of governance, though often only through whispers. Rumors spreading through the city heightened fear and curiosity. For whom does the emperor rule? For his own gain or for Rome? Questions circulated in forums, markets, and baths. This atmosphere intensified Nero's psychological pressure and served to justify his cruelty. The ruthless acts of his early years foreshadowed his future deeds. Having escaped his mother's shadow, Nero was now ready to rule Rome without regard for any human limits. Power for him meant control and fear alone. Mercy, conscience, and justice no longer held a place on his list. And so, within Rome's grand stone walls, the silent whispers became a harbinger of the emperor's cruelty and the merciless legacy that would mark history. This story, woven from a mother's ambition, a son's thirst for power, and an empire's bloody rule, had become one of the darkest chapters in history. After seizing complete control of the throne, Nero transformed the way Rome was governed. The palace and senate were no longer merely administrative bodies. They had become a playground shaped entirely by his will. Advisors and generals lived in constant fear. Even a small mistake could mean death. The palace had turned into a silent laboratory of terror, where whispers and threats spread like poison through the stone halls. Nero extended this policy of fear to the people. His first acts included organizing lavish games and festivals in the city's squares, but behind the spectacle lay a ruthless message. Power means both entertainment and death. In the theaters, staged punishments of criminals became public spectacles. Audiences watched in awe and horror, feeling the full force of the young emperor's power. Nero did not merely govern the city. He consolidated his authority through a mixture of fear and desire. Intrigue within the palace and senate deepened further. Senators competed to win the emperor's favor, but a single misstep could be fatal. Nero openly punished some, destroyed the reputations of others, and humiliated yet others. Everyone knew that incurring his wrath was not merely a warning, it could mean death. This ruthless policy had completely destroyed any sense of security within the palace. The young emperor ruled the city according to his own desires and ambitions. Figures like Poppaea Sabina represented both power and lust at his side, influencing his decisions. Nero's passions transformed governance into a constant swing between desire and fear. Even if the public was unaware, rumors and whispers through Rome's streets spread the darkness of the emperor's nature. One of Nero's most shameful traits was his extreme cruelty toward his family and inner circle. Though he had freed himself from his mother, this was only the beginning. Close relatives, advisors, and generals, feeling his fearsome power, submitted completely. Everyone understood that provoking Nero's anger was not merely a political mistake. It could be a fatal one. This consolidation of power also reflected Nero's psychological state. He trusted no one, and every relationship was measured in terms of utility and threat. Mercy and conscience had been replaced in his mind by fear and ruthlessness. Every scandal and act of betrayal during this period only cemented his cruel character further. The people and those around him increasingly felt the effects of his harsh rule. In Rome, grandeur and entertainment existed alongside an atmosphere of hidden fear and threat. The young emperor on the throne was no longer just a political leader. He had established absolute control and terror over the city. This period marked the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in Roman history. At this point, Nero's reign had become more than a struggle for power. It was a spectacle exposing the darkest aspects of human nature. Fear, cruelty, and scandal converged over the palace, the Senate, and the people, turning Rome into the stage for one of history's most shameful and blood-soaked reigns. Nero's power was now absolute, yet this authority brought not peace to Rome, but chaos. The young emperor had become more than a political figure. He had become a symbol of absolute fear and desire over the city. The palace and Senate moved at his command, while whispers and threats echoed between the stone walls. Everyone knew that incurring Nero's wrath meant death, and so advisors, generals, and senators were forced to obey. Nero's first scandals were rooted in his ruthlessness toward those closest to him and his unchecked lust. Women like Poppaea Sabina came to symbolize not only desire, but also power by his side. Under their influence, Nero felt freer and bolder, but that freedom came with shameful and bloody acts. In the palace, during festivals and public spectacles, he turned the torture of criminals into entertainment, evoking both fear and awe among the people. In the streets of Rome, hidden terror spread beneath the outward splendor. Intrigue within the Senate and the palace reached its peak. Some senators and generals obeyed orders simply to survive, knowing that a single misstep could bring death. Nero would kill on a whim one day and elevate someone else the next, wielding fear and uncertainty as instruments of both governance and psychological control. Everyone watched the young emperor's capricious and cruel nature, yet no one could predict when they might become his next target. The citizens of Rome gradually recognized the terrifying face of Nero's rule. Rumors, whispers, and gossip spread through the city. The emperor killed his mother, and now no one is safe. Even those who doubted the stories felt the pervasive fear. Nero's acts, driven by lust and ambition, inspired both horror and a strange fascination in the eyes of the people. His cruelty extended to those closest to him. Some were executed, some exiled, and others quietly disappeared from the palace. This ruthless purge secured his throne while sending a clear message to all: before the emperor, no bond, law, or conscience offers safety. Yet the young emperor's power was not limited to fear and death. Desire and spectacle formed the second pillar of his reign. As the populace and the court witnessed his extravagant and indulgent entertainments, they also saw the boundless, shameful, and bloody side of his authority. Rome was simultaneously enthralled by grandeur and entertainment, and writhing in silent terror and chaos. Ultimately, Nero's reign etched itself into history's darkest pages. What began as a family tragedy with his mother's death evolved into a rule founded on fear and desire. palace intrigue, Senate silence, and whispers among the people combined to plunge Rome into an unforgettable era of horror and disgrace. At this point, Nero's story concluded not merely as a family tragedy, but as a dramatic reflection of the darkest aspects of an empire, a society, and human nature. A period where power, authority, lust, and blood converged, forever marking one of the most shameful and bloody chapters in Roman history.